Welcome and thank you for joining the NEHA National Webinar Series. This is the first installment of a four-part leadership series, The Hard Facts of Soft Skills. I'm Christy Denbrock, Chief Learning Officer at NEHA. Today, our presenter is our own David Dijak. Dr. Dijak is the Chief Executive Officer at NEHA, a position he's held since May of 2015. Under his leadership, NEHA has increased its membership by 55% and grown its staff from 28 to over 60 full-time employees. Throughout his 35-year public health career, Dr. Dijak has been Dean of an accredited School of Public Health, Health Director for an international non-governmental organization, and a consultant to private sector organizations such as Exxon, Saudi Aramco, and Ford Motor Company. David earned his doctorate in public health from the University of Michigan, a master's of science in public health from the University of Utah, and is a board certified sorry, Dr. Dijak,
Wow.
industrial hygienist. Oh my goodness, I've given you a new career. During his presentation, please feel free to write any questions you may have in the chat box, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. If you are not a NEHA member and you enjoy this session, we invite you to become one at neha.org. Dr. Dijak, shall we begin, or would you like to look at my teeth? I'm so sorry.
I think we are good. And Christy, confirm that you can see my slide deck.
Yes, it looks wonderful.
And I'm glad that Angela, who put a note in the chat box, she couldn't hear. Evidently, she can now hear us. So I think we're good to go. Thanks, everyone, for joining this afternoon. And I'd like to begin by sharing with you a story from early in the COVID pandemic. I received a text message and then a WhatsApp map from someone very close to me, one of my siblings. This person who sent me the message and the map is well-educated, progressive, and well in touch with societal developments. And the map that they sent me, Christy, was a map of South America and Africa together, like the Southern Hemisphere. And it showed just a limited number of COVID cases. And my sibling's point was that because of hydroxychloroquine, that COVID was not spreading in Latin America and Africa, because according to my sibling, because of malaria, everybody in those continents takes chloroquine. You know that that's not true.
Yeah,
The people that take anti-malarial drugs are visitors, are tourists, or missionaries, or other people with a part-time interest in those locations. And my sibling was a victim of misinformation. That is, they received this map and a description of the map from someone that they trusted. And they're like, we have a solution to COVID. It is hydroxychloroquine. And there is no evidence. In fact, it's not good for people to take chloroquine over an extremely long period of time. And then it wasn't very long into COVID when there was the rumor about ivermectin, which is used to treat nematodes, that might be effective for treating COVID. Again, another example of rumors that start online, or rumors that start in maybe reputable places, and the story and the data get corrupted and mislead people to possibly make bad decisions with their health. Listen, for most of us, and for the people listening online today, when you took your class in risk assessment or risk communication as an undergraduate or in graduate school, I believe this is what you had in mind. This is me. This is yours truly, looking somewhat intimidated by the press in the West African nation of Ghana. I was being interviewed as part of a week-long health and safety program that I was anchoring. And individuals within Ghana were interested in understanding environmental health risks in their country and what their government and what companies were doing about it. And I dug deep into my toolkit, my war chest, if you will, of classic risk communication techniques. You know, we talk about 27, 9, and 3, a 27-word message that can be delivered in 9 seconds that has 3 main messages, right? That's the old 27, 9, and 3. With risk communication, there's planning and listening and being honest and citing credible sources and being compassionate and meeting people where they were at. And you know that I'm a classically trained industrial hygienist, Christy, not a dental hygienist, although I appreciate the artistry and hard work of dental hygienists. But the education and the training from people like Vince Cavello, for those of you that are my age, you know that he was one of the greatest and best risk communicators within public health that I think in the history of the country that has produced. I personally have attended his courses with him as a speaker. Peter Sandman, for those of you that come from occupational health backgrounds, understand that he too is a stalwart of the risk communication universe, where risk is equal to hazard plus outrage. And so I've had the classes, I've had the training, I've had the history of working in communications, but you know, the world has changed, and it's changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Today, we have all kinds of different actors, primarily in the social media universe, but in other universes as well, both on TV as well as in newsprint, that are communicating public health messages in a manner that isn't helpful. Why is that necessarily important? Don't people go to you at local health departments and reputable companies for information? Well, I want you to think about why this conversation that we're having today is so important. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, but I think I'm on terra firma, Christy, is there are 3 existential crises facing humanity today. And we could argue about this if you want, but I think I'm in very firm territory by saying a nuclear war is an existential threat to humanity. Another pandemic, however that may express itself, is also an existential crisis, much like we saw with the flu epidemic of 100 years ago, as well as COVID epidemic more recently. And then for my colleagues from North Carolina and from the Florida Gulf Coast, as we've seen, extreme weather and climate change is also potentially an existential threat as we look at not only severe and extreme weather, but also drought. We have colleagues going to Phoenix. You, Christy, are going to Phoenix this week, where the temperature is over 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and today is October the 1st. And so these existential crises really potentially put much of our health and safety and financial prosperity at risk. Now, you may ask, well, Dijak, why are you talking about existential crises? Because people who consume social media, which is all of us, it is our partners, our spouses, our children, our parents, if they're alive, we're all consumers of media. And what I know is this: for those that want to plant misinformation or disinformation, which I will describe here in just a few minutes, these conspiracy theorists, if you will, prey on people who feel powerless. Now think about that for a moment. Do you feel powerful over nuclear war? Do you feel powerful and in control over a pandemic? Do you feel like you have control over climate change? None of us do. So all of us to some degree feel powerless, which makes us amenable to the messages that we may read online, or messages that may be given to us in podcasts, or messages that may be provided to us in our favorite newsprint. We also know that people, and all of us, including me, at some point in our life are suffering from low self-esteem. And what we know around levels of trust is that today in the United States, in a recent survey that was conducted, about 23% of US adults, 23%, trust government writ large. So we have low levels of trust in this country. All of us intermittently suffer from low self-esteem, and the types of existential crises I just described, all of us, including me, feel to some degree powerless, which means all of us are in the same soup, Christy. All of us are in the same bowl, in that we may be amenable to messages that perhaps are either deliberately or accidentally containing information which is not helpful or untruthful. And this is why this is important. For my colleagues, for my constituents that are on this presentation this afternoon, you spend a lot of your time in the general public or working with the general public either directly or indirectly. And so you know that you are a very important person in the way that you convey information. And when you're out in the public inspecting facilities, the hospitality industry, the retail food industry, a daycare, and early childhood education, and the list goes on, you know that people are feeling a little bit unsettled around climate change and the pandemic and the nuclear, and even today, just moments before this webinar started, things are heating up in the Middle East. We are in the center right now of an information barrage, and many of our constituents are alarmed by that. There's a low level of trust, and here we are trying to do our work to protect and promote public health and to ensure that industry can do what it needs to do to ensure a prosperous local community. Christy, this slide that you see in front of you is what I refer to as the environmental health isthmus. This isthmus is just a piece of land that connects two other pieces of land. And what I like to convey is a metaphor. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, this is where we are today as a nation and as a planet. We are spending less and less of our time, like in Asheville, North Carolina today, hyper-focused on issues related to compliance. What they're doing in Asheville is trying to recover from flooding from a major climate-related weather event. And it's pretty clear that the type of hurricane that was experienced there is unusual in the normal way that we think about hurricanes. It stayed and it rained for a while. The Food and Drug Administration is about to, I think in the next year or two, develop and introduce a completely new way of having labels on foods. If you think about vector control in this country today, things like Eastern equine is, there you go, I can't pronounce this, equine encephalitis, EEE, is a new type of, not new, but a resurging mosquito-borne virus that has real potential for health and safety impacts in the United States. West Nile virus, though it's been in the country for a while, is also having a resurgence. If we think about indoor air quality, what do we say to people when there's a wildfire out? We say what? Stay indoors. And how do you protect yourself from airborne particulate that may be entrained into the ventilation system? Even though you're inside, we know that indoor air pollution is 4 to 6 times higher than it is outdoors. And so, to make a long story short, the world is changing. It's becoming much more complicated to describe to the average citizen, to your parents, to your brothers and sisters, and to your children, what risks are and what we can do about them. It's not as simple as you see on the left-hand side of the slide is, yeah, we're in compliance with the Clean Water Act. We can understand that. There's a line in the sand. Or the Clean Air Act, or the Toxic Substance Control Act, or the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. We have gone from really clear lines in the sand to very vague and abstract concepts which scare us, that make us feel powerless. And so as we talk about misinformation and disinformation, we are emotionally open to it. And I hope I'm making my point to everyone. This isn't just another thing to manage. Society has moved into this direction. And so what I would like to share with you today is first this concept of information, in my opinion, is now a social determinant of health. When you went to university, when you went to college, it was not considered a social determinant of health. Even for those of you that may have graduated in May or June of this year, my guess is when you thought of social determinants of health, what you were thinking about was your address, your income, your education, perhaps even your race as a social determinant of health. I believe because of the way that people get information and consume information today can lead to decisions that they make that may shorten or lengthen their lives. Now, for those of you that were reading the news and tracking developments in the country, many people died of COVID who one of the last expressions that they made before they passed away was, "I thought it was a joke. I thought COVID wasn't real." This is dis and misinformation at work. So I would like to say to you today, I believe that for professors that may be on the call today, that you need to start thinking about teaching information as a social determinant of health. About 80%, and I'm guessing it's closer to 100%, 80% of adults in the United States search for health information through their phone or through their laptop. When I spoke at a NEHA affiliate meeting a few years ago, an audience of maybe 200 people, I asked, where do you get your information from? And most of the hands went up when I said, do you get your information from Facebook? But most people are using their smartphones. They're going to Twitter or Facebook. They may be going to TikTok and other places to get information about health, about diet, about exercise, about risks in the workplace, about risks in their community, about COVID. We're not calling up the local health department to get that information. We're not calling our doctors in most cases. Most of the time, from the comfort of our desks and our bedrooms, we are doing Google searches. We're searching for information. And this is what, coupled with the uncertainty in the global public health space, the space I just described to you, the last couple of slides, makes us particularly ripe for dis and mis and malinformation to be effectively shared and acted on. So let's get right into the issue of what I'll call the evil sisters of information disorder. And this is not my slide. You can see the credit for the slide is at the bottom of the PowerPoint in front of you. But let's first talk about the three basic types of information disorder. The first is misinformation, and these are unintentional mistakes that we might make with information that we convey. So there's no evil intent here. There's no evil intent. It's just us making mistakes, and I'm about to give you examples of this. The second major category of information disorder is disinformation. And this is information that is fabricated or deliberately manipulated to create conspiracy theories or to generate rumors. It is intentionally fabricated, and that's the key message here. Misinformation is an accident, disinformation is deliberate, and then malinformation is deliberate publication of private information for personal or corporate interests. And the classic example that I see in my day-to-day life is revenge porn, where someone may have a compromised picture of their partner, the partners break up, and then this person may share it or blackmail someone. And you've all seen this, I know, or you've seen reports of it. So I want to be really clear. We're going to focus on mis and disinformation. That is unintentional mistakes and fabricated information that isn't true, that's done for a malicious purpose. We are not going to spend so much time on malinformation today because most of us in environmental health are primarily focused on mis and disinformation. There are 10 types of mis and disinformation. You don't need to memorize these. And it's been my experience that oftentimes when you have information that is not factually correct, it blends several or a couple of these at one time. So these are, I'm going to describe them in nice, neat little boxes, but to be clear, they're often a blend or an amalgamation of one or more of these categories. The first one is called a false connection, and this is when the headline doesn't support the content. This is an example of, you may say, the end of the world is near, but the article is really about puppies. And so there's a disconnect between what the headline is and what the content is. There's manipulated content. And again, I have examples of these that we're going to go over in just a minute. This is where genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive. You know, the royal family in England is always victims of this. The British press will have pictures of them, but it is the content may be manipulated to show them doing something that they actually weren't doing. It's just a way of using some type of photoshopping to misrepresent what's going on. There's also something referred to as misleading content, and this is use of information to frame out an issue or an individual. A classic case of this is what's going on in the country right now with the election process, where we will frame out whatever information, depending on which direction leaning that we have, one way or the other, that may frame out one of the major candidates in a negative way or perhaps an inappropriately positive way. The fourth category is false content, and this is when genuine content is shared with a false context itself. So the information is real, but it gives out, because of the way it's framed, it misrepresents what's actually happening. I think one of my favorite ones from a consumer perspective is satire or parody. And yesterday we were discussing The Onion, which is a service which you can find online, which is a lot of political satire associated with it. But if you didn't know better, if you didn't know The Onion, you would think it's a real story that they were reporting, when in fact it's completely untrue. It's just meant for comedy. There's imposter content. This is when genuine sources are impersonated. That is, somebody presents themselves as something that they are not, fraudulent, if you will. And then there's fabricated content, content that's 100% false, and it's designed to deceive and to do harm. Think about a public health figure that has been manipulated to show the opposite of what it's intended to demonstrate. Sponsored content is one that we all encounter every day. I consume the major news news outlets like Fox or CNN. I'm agnostic when it comes to, or Reuters. And what you'll find is there is paid advertising that poses as an article. Now, for those major mainstream news outlets, they will say this is sponsored content. But in other outlets, you may not know that what you're reading was actually written by the petrochemical industry to support a particular angle that they may have. Number 9 is one that I think we're all in over our head with in the election cycle, as it is every time there's an election cycle, there's propaganda. This is content that is used to manage attitudes, your values, or your knowledge. This happens every election cycle in every country. There's propaganda that's released. Whenever there's a war, one side will be releasing propaganda to support their particular position. And then finally, there's an error, and this is an honest mistake. When a news outlet or a website will make a mistake when they're reporting, they will say something that's not true or it's misleading. They weren't really deliberately doing it. They screwed up. And so those are the top 10 types of myths and disinformation. What I'd like to do now is to give you an example of each of them. And I'm going to do this in a linear fashion. And Christy, I think you're going to share this PowerPoint presentation later through a PDF. You folks are welcome to take this. And as long as you don't misrepresent it through dis or misinformation, you're welcome to take it and to share these examples. I have tried my best to not use political examples. NEHA is apolitical. We do not support the Reds or the Blues. We support everybody. And so I've done my best to give you examples where we don't disparage a candidate or disparage a party, and that is my commitment to you. The first illustration I'd like to share with you comes from The Guardian, which is a mainstream news outlet in the UK, and this is what I'll call the false connection. That is, an expert was interviewed and there was a misrepresentation of what the person said when they were interviewed. And you can see this guy, David Spiegelhalter, saying, I didn't say a lockdown was needed, but the headline that was presented was that lockdown was needed during COVID. There was a false connection between the headline and what was actually in the article itself. Now then, I can tell you from my own experience, when you're interviewed by the press, this kind of stuff, you just say one sentence that a reporter can take or an editor of a reporter can take and get folks to glom onto your article or glom onto the article that was being written. They will do that. And so a false connection here in this case was what was written in the headlines and what was written in the body of the article were two different things. And it was probably done deliberately to ensure as many eyes as possible on that article. But The Guardian is a British newspaper, and again, it is pretty mainstream. There is manipulated content, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know which one was the original. We can see a gentleman on the right, looks like in front of the Great Wall of China, waving a flag, and then the person on the left with perhaps their son in the background waving a different flag, an American flag. Which one is original and which one is the fabrication? I don't know. And I'll be honest with you, to be candid, I'm not sure how many pictures we see online that are actual unedited photos. Let me be clear. Most everything that we see online has been edited for clarity. It's been edited for shape and size. It's been edited for contrast. Normally, it's not this severe, but I believe, particularly for young people that may be suffering from stress and depression, they're comparing themselves to people that don't exist in the real world in the way that they're presented. Blemishes and muscle tone have all been enhanced or unenhanced depending on the particular purpose. So I think manipulated content subtly is a really significant issue. I am not talking politics here, but I will say that the conversation that happened at the White House a few years ago, in which I believe in a joking way and not in a serious way, someone had mentioned that Clorox could be used to treat COVID. What we do know empirically is that poison control centers in the United States received a 5% bump in reports of poisonings not long after this whole thing hit the news cycle. And so this is where misleading content, whether it was deliberately misleading, whether it was accidentally misleading, I'm not assigning motive here. I'm not assigning that someone was trying to do something evil. What I will say is, with those of us in public health, we need to be really careful that we don't mislead our readers mislead our leaders, our readers, and our communities. So we need to be wickedly clear with what we're saying. But that's an example where there was a public health impact from something that was reported. Fabricated content. This is something which is absolutely untrue. And this again comes because COVID was just ripe with these things. This was reported online. The COVID jab, they skipped all animal trials because all the animals were dying and they went directly to people. This isn't true. This simply is not true. But look at the picture. You would think it was true. And if you didn't know better and weren't curious and dug in a little bit, what does it take to look at something like this and to draw conclusions from it? The average attention span of a person today is 8 seconds. Probably takes 3 or 4 seconds to read this and to process it. And my point is, fabricated content can be very misleading for people with short attention spans who are skipping through space, particularly if it's repeated in derivative forms of one another. Sponsored content, you need to be really careful. And if people are talking to you about what they read online, ask them if it was sponsored. Who is particularly good at this are oil companies or people that are selling things. They want you to buy what they're selling. In this particular case, if you go to the major news outlets, scroll towards the bottom, you'll see where the sponsored content is. And if you didn't know better, you would think that you're reading real science. Now, there may be real science in the article just to confuse everyone, but make no mistake, sponsored content is sponsored so that you buy into their position, that you buy into the story that they're telling, that you buy their products or buy into their frame of what they're trying to accomplish as an organization, as a company, or as an individual. So sponsored content is something that all of us need to be aware of. This is a hilarious one, content that's just false, where someone will take a picture of something and assign it to a condition that never actually existed. So here's a picture where someone is saying this is a pro-Republican candidate rally, when in fact it was actually people praying in Egypt. I just use this because everyone can relate to it, but you see this type of false content just littered throughout our media posts that you can find online. And by the way, after this presentation, you can find your own, I'm sure, just by spending 10 minutes going online. This is what I was referring to earlier about satire or parody. The Onion, it is sometimes insensitive. It's sometimes a little bit racist. It's a comedy site. I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying this is an example of satire. Bloomberg, in this case, Mayor Bloomberg, defends the police department's controversial Stop and Kiss program. And in other words, policemen were stopping people involved in infractions and kissing them instead of giving them a ticket. There's no such program. There's no such program. But imagine your mother or your dad coming across this article online, and what would they be thinking? And this is the kind of stuff that people glom onto, and it could be potentially risky. Here's imposter or fraudulent content. This looks like a legitimate table provided by the Texas Health and Human Services Department. Folks, this thing is fabricated. And so this is the kind of thing that you find, and then someone will interpret it and create their own reality around something that doesn't even exist. And if someone isn't asking the questions, because by the way, this looks legitimate to me, and they have at so-and-so TV and KHOU and at Texas DSHS looks legitimate, but this is the world that we're in today. And so just because it's online doesn't mean that it's true. Propaganda, this one made me chuckle a little bit. This is propaganda from Russia that was timed to be released a couple days after they invaded Ukraine. How long ago was that? A year and change. And they were anticipating that Ukraine was going to collapse. And this particular announcement and celebration, at least a while back, was still online. They failed to take it down. This is simply what's referred to as propaganda. There's a lot of propaganda today in the United States about the election. You can find it in 5 minutes by going online. And the last example I'd like to share with you goes back from the Obama administration. And this was the Washington Post Express. They were reporting on a women's march. And you see on the left-hand side, they put the sign for men in the middle of their cover. It was a mistake. It was a woman's march, not a men's march. And this is what a mistake looks like in the public press. You would think by looking at the cover that this was all about men, and when in fact it was really all about women, and someone probably got into a lot of hot water there. But I think that the key message, Christy, is that all of us need to bring a jaded eye to anything that we hear, that we see online, or frankly, any amalgamation of the two. We need to ask ourselves in the year 2024, is this real? Or is there an alternate explanation for what we're seeing? I would now like to talk to you as individuals, and I think there's 50 or 60 of us online this afternoon. I'm going to give you some advice on what your role in environmental health should be. And I'm sure there's no surprise. I want you to be part of the solution. So I mentioned earlier that information is a social determinant of health. I hope I've made that case to you through the examples that I've given and some of the illustrations that I provided. So that was a key message. Information is a social determinant of health. Number two, you are the face of public health. You are the folks in the community. You're working with regulators. You're working with daycare and with beaches and pools and spas. You're working with early childhood education. You are where people are living their lives. So I ask of you to be part of the solution. In your local communities, please try and understand your local information ecosystem. What do I mean by that? I used to live in a small community of 300 homes. 300 homes. Everybody knew everyone's business. But what was interesting, if you wanted to know what was going on in the community, you wouldn't go next door. You would go to the post office, because the post office is where people talked. Post office is where people shared information. We had a mosquito mosquito suppression spraying system where I lived, and everyone was talking about, was it safe or unsafe, and what was it doing to bees and monarchs, the pollinators. But that information ecosystem, its anchor, its hub was my local post office. So my question to you are, who are the ecological dominants for information in your service area? You have to accept that misinformation and disinformation travels 6 times faster than the truth. That is not my data. You can look that up yourself. This information travels so quickly because in most cases, people are going to sources that they trust. Their family members, maybe it's Fox, maybe it's CNN, maybe it's MSNBC. But if there's mis or disinformation on those sites, maybe it's an online news source, that information travels faster because you trust it. You're sharing it with more people. And we need to recognize that. I think the third message, if be part of the solution, is number 2, is people have an emotional relationship with information. If you think your t-test or your p-value or your chi-square or your linear regression, are you with me? Are you with me? Is going to change somebody's mind. It may change your boss's mind. It may change your professor's mind, but it's probably not going to change my family member's mind when they look at a map and they see that there's no COVID, they think, in Latin America or on the continent of Africa. There is no data that's going to change their minds. People have an emotional relationship with information. They have an emotional relationship with data. Be aware of that. I feel like we need to listen because legitimate concerns exist. Should I use ivermectin? I read a report. I even saw on Medline that some physicians are recommending using ivermectin for severe cases of COVID. There are legitimate questions that we can't poo-poo. And if you're getting the impression that I'm poo-pooing all of this, you are mistaken. We need to make sure we understand what the root questions are coming from our constituents and to be sure that we address those in an emotional way. If you work in a local health department, I would encourage you to open a tip line, however you want to do that. However you want to do that, online, maybe a phone answering service, maybe get an intern or students to host that for you. But if you're in a case where there is a new disease moving through, measles epidemic moving through your community, and people have questions, be sure that you have a way for folks to express their concerns and their questions in a way that an authorized person like yourself can answer them. I think we also need to report stuff and to encourage your families and your children to report mis and disinformation when you see it. Now, these boxes on this slide are not my boxes. I'm sorry, I forgot to cite this, but you can see they say, see the guide on reporting fake content on Instagram, reporting misinformation on TikTok, reporting false information on YouTube. I think it's up to us. When we see this, we need to go through the process of submitting some type of notification to these sites and other sites that, you know, what you're saying, what some of your constituents are expressing is untrue and frankly may lead to the early death or serious injury of people that actually pay you monthly for your service, and to express it that way. Each of us does our work, including me, in a social context. One of the, I think, struggles we have as a profession is we are trained scientists. Most of everyone on this call today has 30+ units of math and science. You're a scientist. And we spend a lot more time worried about the science, worried about compliance, thinking about risk than we do thinking about the social sciences. And I think this has set us up for real challenges in our current state of practice. There is a book written by a gentleman whose name is at the bottom of the slide, Robert Cialdini, on being an influencer. Cialdini is a researcher. He's not a social commentator. He's a researcher with data and facts and evidence. And he's identified a handful of principles that, by the way, are anchored in really good recommendations for public health. He doesn't talk about public health in his book. Let me be clear. He's talking about marketing and sales and other ventures like that. But the principles that he describes and provides to us, I think, are absolutely perfect for this era of mis, dis, and malinformation. The principle of reciprocity, the principle of commitment, the principle of social proof, the principle of authority, the one that drives me crazy about us. And let me say to you, and listen to me, if I ever hear you say, or I hear through the rumor mill that you said, I'm only an environmental health professional, I'm only a sanitarian, I'm going to come find you with my travel budget and chew you out in person. You are the chief science officer for your community or for your constituency, and you need to act like a local health official, whether you are or not. You know more about the science of disease conditions and risks in your community than anybody else, including physicians or epidemiologists. Let me just put that out on the table. You need to act like the authority that you are. Don't give that away. There's a principle of commitment and consistency. And this is one of the things that I feel we don't do very well in environmental health. When someone asks us, is it safe? Fill in the blank. Is it safe to swim in a swimming pool with babies wearing swimming diapers? Are you with me? How would you answer that? My guess is you would answer it, well, there are certain confounders and certain things we don't know. And so what we do in environmental health is we talk about all the things we don't know, and then we answer the question. And that uncertainty that we introduce into people's minds drives them crazy, to be honest with you. And I know that's not politically correct way to say it, but it really agitates folks when it's uncertain. Should I wear a mask during a wildfire episode? Yes or no? Would that mask be an N95? Yes or no? My child has asthma. Can they go outside during XYZ air pollution conditions? When we act uncertain, we drive people to go to websites to get certainty. And we are part of the problem when we do that. And then finally, the principle of unity. All of us are smarter than one of us. And that is, we need to lean on each other in environmental health and to focus on best practice, whether or not it comes from me or Christy Denbrock or anybody else across the country. There's a book. I don't get a commission for this, but I am going to share it with you. And you can find a podcast on this book. It's called Super Communicators. And this strikes home. And this book was released in the last 12 months. I know you can find it online at Amazon or your favorite bookstore. And what the author of this book is saying for folks that are particularly effective at communicating is they're really talking about emotional connection. And the example that the author gives, and if you catch the podcast, I think it was provided by Freakonomics Radio. If you catch the podcast, they talk about the most effective FBI negotiator in the history of the United States. And when they go to interview this very famous negotiator, they expect to see a James Bond person pulling up in a late model sports car, dressed in their Brooks Brothers suit with diamonds, with a diamond ring. And what they find is that it was really an overweight old guy in a beat up suit who was the most effective negotiator in the history of the FBI. And what this person said is, I don't really think about it, but what I try to do with the people I talk to is to have an emotional connection. What is this really about? How do we feel as public health communicators, and who are we as a group? And I don't have time. I think I'm already talking for too long. I don't have time to unpack this. I would love to do it at a later time. Christy, if you want another webinar just on this, I think this would be really fun. It's like, how do we emotionally connect with our constituents? You are the face of public health. You are the chief science officers. When people say to me, you know what keeps me up at night? They don't say chronic disease. They don't talk about metabolic disease. They're not talking about Wegovy. You know what they're up late about, thinking about, is Legionella. You know what they're up thinking late about is, how are people in Asheville, North Carolina going to get back into their homes, and what will be safe there? Do you know what are keeping people up at night in Canada, where there have been over the last year profound wildfires? And is it safe to go outside and do these Carsey Rosenthal filters, which many of us have been reading about on the news? Are they effective? Because they're like 1/10 the price of what an air filtration unit costs at Home Depot or Lowe's. Those are the kinds of things that keep people up at night. And you know who is uniquely suited to answer those questions is you. Don't send folks to the internet where they're going to be subject to all kinds of different influences and mal and disinformation. And as you can see here, in some parts of the world, we are already being referred to as scientific officers, because that's what you are. You look at the bottom left-hand side of the slide, you see a position description for a scientific officer. This comes from Rachel, who is in Western Australia. She gave me permission to post this. I think this is the angle that we need to take. We need to focus on solutions. We need to know how to communicate, and not in 27, 9, and 3 bytes, but we need to understand that the phrases and the words that we use are confusing to some people who already have low trust in government. Words like absence and likelihood and exceedingly small and anomalies, that those don't reassure anybody. They're going to go online to get information if you talk like that. And by the way, this isn't me. This George Lakoff is the source of this, and he's a very famous communicator. But what is effective is when you put a face on it. If you're worried about drowning in your local surface waters, you need to put a face on a drowning victim as part of your risk communication. Put a face on it. People relate to other people much more than they relate to data. And if you think I'm disparaging data, you're mistaken. But we also have to understand the genetic material that we're all comprised of that has us wanting to connect and to be socially connected as part of that. As you talk to people and you're trying to encourage them to live safe and long lives, whether this is people you're inspecting or just general community members, always appeal to their self-interest. Is it in their best interest to have their deli meat factory closed down? No, it is not. And you know what I'm saying is true. What's in it for them? Please understand that people read your body language faster than they can listen to the words that come out of your mouth. That first picture I showed you of me in Ghana, if you go back and look at it, I'm acting insecure. And I didn't even know it until I looked at the picture later. What I'm conveying through my body language is insecurity. I'm embarrassed to tell you, but it's the truth. People make decisions about what they're going to do based on their identity, their values, and beliefs. And they trust you as a messenger. The message may be secondary. So what are you doing to be at your local version of the post office, creating credibility? This is our moment in environmental health to be public health meta leaders. That is the leaders of leaders. We have the ability to describe and prescribe because of the nature of our educations and the time we spend in the community. We have the unique ability, not epidemiologists, you, to compress morbidity in your communities. And if I had more time, I'd share with you all the innovative things happening at the local level. Frankly, in frontier and rural communities all across the United States, there is really great stuff. It's not just New York and Miami-Dade and LA. It's many places all throughout the United States. As I close, I want to share with you that I had the chance to go to the Andy Warhol Museum after our annual conference in Pittsburgh back in July. And one of the things that struck me about Andy Warhol is he reinvented himself. He started off as a commercial artist, then he went into pop art, and then finished his career in portraits and images. Andy Warhol is a person who identified with the changing nature of civilization and appealed to that civilization throughout his life in a way that resonated with them. This picture of the blue butterfly, which is riff on a Robert Frost, a poet laureate poem of the same name, The Blue Butterflies, talks about these beautiful blue butterflies on a cold spring day when the flowers aren't out yet. And all you can see is the butterflies with no flowers or other blooms around. And what Frost was conveying is that beautiful things can be found in an otherwise bleak landscape. I believe that's you. I believe it's environmental health. You are the blue butterflies of the public health profession. You are the most informed and knowledgeable scientists that conduct your work to protect and promote the health of the public at the profoundly local level. I believe this is your time. I believe this is our time as a national organization. I genuinely believe that. And I want you to know that we need to take part in any way that you can. It's not somebody else's job, it's your job to address miss, and malinformation. I hope you have found this presentation helpful. And Christy, I don't know if we have time for questions.
We do, and we do have a few questions. The first question I'm going to ask you, Dr. Dijak, is, say one of our attendees puts out a press release on a crisis or a foodborne illness outbreak in their area, and that gets distorted into disinformation. How do they combat that?
So I think they do combat it, number one. Number one, should I stop sharing my screen? Or are we good?
Sure, then everybody can see you more.
Oh, that's bad for them. Sorry. So I believe that this is absolutely something that we need to do. Is if it is distorted, we need to combat that. And in any way that your public information officer, or if it's a personal thing that, and this was a professional question, that needs to be combated real time. Don't let it sit, because the longer that it sits and gets legs. So some people say just ignore it. I don't agree with that. I believe we need to be in the game, and we need to be combating dis and misinformation real time to the degree that we can. Listen, this is a journey, not a destination. For people listening this afternoon, this is part of your workplace forever. We just need to be used to that. So I do encourage real time combating of dis and misinformation.
Next question. What do you think is the best way to fact check information before you send it on?
I believe that we need to be quick with our communications. We need to be nimble and just admit errors when they occur. So we do need to fact check, but it's important to get out of the gate early and to frame the discussion and to say, we don't know X. And as soon as we have an update for you, we're going to provide that. And that update's coming at 9 p.m. tonight, and show up at 9 p.m. tonight. So what drives people crazy is uncertainty. So you don't have to promise an outcome. You can promise a process and then honor with fidelity that process. And people will then trust you if you are honest with the process. So with the fact checking, do what you can and say, this is what we believe to be true, and here's what we're doing. And in 3 hours or 3 days, whatever the right cadence is, then you show up. Even if you don't know anything different, you still show up and say, nothing has changed, because it's the cadence. It's the connection. It's the time together. It's the frequency, proximity, duration, and intensity of that relationship. People will begin to trust you. So if you don't know the outcome, commit to a process and honor it.
Well, I think you just answered our question that came in, but I will read you the question if you want to expand on it. And it says, Dr. Dijak, can you share a specific example of how you answer an EH question with the public and better formulation when, quote, we do not know, unquote, first and then the answer? So I think you just explained that, of even if you don't have the answer, that is your answer. And you tell them when you expect the answer.
Okay, so here's an example. So I thank you for the difficult question, whoever that came from. I used to be involved in inspecting swimming pools after, let's say, a brown alert. That is when there was a fecal accident in the pool, and it was just some of the nature of the work I was involved in. This was a couple decades ago. And one day I was asked by a judge in a private swimming pool, was it safe to swim in the pool with babies that have these swim diapers on? And my answer was, yes, it is safe. So I answered the question. And then I said, and this is what I mean. I didn't say, you know, the science suggests that baby diapers aren't very effective, which by the way is true. Okay. Which by the way is true. But I said, yes, it's safe. And this is what I mean by safe. There were policies, there were procedures, there was extra attention to chlorination and disinfection. There was a high attention pay. People had to take a shower. All of the things that I believe would create a safe swimming environment. Now, some of you on this line may disagree with me and say, oh, that's, but I always answer the question. I remove the uncertainty, and then I fill in, as opposed to doing it the other way around, which, by the way, we're taught in schools of public health and in academic programs, right? Give all the caveats and then say the probability. As we heard from Lakoff, people don't really dig probabilities. Your boss does, your coworkers do, we love probabilities, but for the general public, mostly not.
Well, it's unfortunate, but that's all the time we have for the questions and answers. today. If you do have any more questions, please drop them in the chat box. We will get Dr. Dijak to answer those. And when we put this webinar, it will be recorded and will be up on the NEHA YouTube channel. We will answer those questions. And so, Dr. Dijak, you did mention about emotional intelligence just a little bit, and we do have a full webinar on emotional intelligence. That's part 3 of this series. So I invite everyone to join us next Tuesday, same time, when we'll be joined by Alicia Love, and she will be presenting on effective management for environmental and public health professionals. And please take a few moments to fill out the survey that you will receive. Your feedback is instrumental in allowing us to bring you the topics that interest you and complete our mission to build, sustain, and empower an effective environmental workforce. So Dr. Dijak, any parting words before we sign off for today?
I know everybody's really busy. Thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. If there's anything you'd like me to unpack in a later talk, I'd be delighted to do it. Please drop your request in the chat or email myself or Christy. But Godspeed to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for attending, and thank you, Dr. Dijak. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
My pleasure. Bye.